Okay, Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Far from my deliverance are the words of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I have no rest. Yet you are holy. O you who are enthroned upon the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were delivered. In you they trusted and were not disappointed. Okay. The chapters we're going to talk about today have to do with foretelling the Messiah is coming. And Psalm 22 has some of those verses in it. So I thought we'd spend a little bit at the beginning of Psalm 22. Catherine, would you read verses 15 and 16?
Sarah's always here first. Where's Sarah?
Oh, Sarah's not here. Sarah's not here. She's on
Oh, no.
Mine, right?
15 and 16 of Isaiah 51.
Okay. I am Yahweh your God, who stirs up the sea, making its waves roar. Yahweh Sabaoth is my name. I put my words into your mouth. I hid you in the shadow of my hand, to spread out the heavens and lay the earth's foundations, and say to Zion, you are my people.
Keep going, please.
Okay. Awake, awake to your feet, Jerusalem. You who from Yahweh's hand have drunk the cup of his wrath. The chalice, the stupefying cup, you have drained to the dregs. There is no one to guide her of all the children she has borne, no one to grasp her hand of all the children she has reared. Double disaster has befallen you. Who is there to sympathize? Pillage and ruin, famine and sword, who is there to console you? Your children are lying helpless at the end of every street, like an antelope trapped in a net. They are filled to the brim with Yahweh's wrath, with the rebuke of your God. So listen to this, afflicted one, drunk, though not with wine. Thus says your Lord Yahweh, your God, defender of your people. Look, I am taking the stupefying cup from your hand, the chalice, the cup of my wrath. You will not have to drink again. I will hand it to your tormentors who used to say to you, on the ground, so that we can walk over you. And you would flatten your back like the ground, like a street for them to walk on.
All right.
Oh, poor Jerusalem.
Poor Jerusalem. In fact, in this section, awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem, is directed directly at Jerusalem. Like, because sometimes God's people fall not just physically asleep, but spiritually asleep. Have you ever felt like you were spiritually asleep, that you were not tuned in to the spiritual side of yourself, that you were kind of off enjoying the more physical side of life?
Or just felt that separation,
Mhm.
separation from God. Yeah.
And it says, you have drunk at the hand of the Lord the cup of his fury. And this is a very common picture in the Old Testament, to drink God's cup of wrath. Very common, that God gives you a cup of wrath, his fury to drink. And he calls Jerusalem here to remember that they have drunk at the hand of the Lord the cup of his fury. And to strengthen it, he says, you even drank the dregs.
Ooh.
Like, you have drunk so long and so deep, you drank the dregs. He goes, and I'm aware of that. I'm aware that you've been drinking this cup of my wrath, my fury, for a long time.
My Bible has a footnote that this section
Okay.
is that Jerusalem is prostrate with grief.
Right.
That's how they describe it.
Mhm. And it says that they've experienced desolation, destruction, famine, sword, and this is the cup they had to drink from. And then finally, they are aware of how bad and how far away they've been. And think about this. In the Garden of Gethsemane, what does Christ pray? If possible,
Like this cup.
take this cup from me.
Mhm.
Do not make me drink from this cup.
Mhm.
And again, it's the idea from the Old Testament of the cup of God's wrath, God's fury. But he concludes with, but not my will, thy will. Okay, and it says, see, I have taken out of your hand the cup of trembling, the dregs of the cup of my fury. You shall no longer drink it. I will put it into the hand of those who afflict you. Okay, I've taken away this cup of wrath and fury, and I'm giving it now to those who have afflicted you. Mostly, I think right now he's talking about the Babylonians. I'm gonna afflict the Babylonians. I'm sure Jerusalem felt like, it's been a long time, couldn't you have done this a little sooner? We've been down and out drinking the dregs for a while now. But God says, now is the time. You are, as your Bible said, Catherine, prostrate before me with grief.
Mhm.
Then he goes on to say, who have said to you, lie down that we may walk over you? Right. This barbaric practice, and I thought that was interesting, is well documented in the ancient East, particularly with the Assyrians, to have the people that they conquer lie down, and they literally walk over them. As if to say, I have conquered you to the
Yeah.
point of you become my floor mats.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine has that noted too.
You think that would be face down or face up?
I don't know, that's kind
Let's
of
hope
an
it's face
interesting.
down,
Yeah.
because face up could be very painful. I mean, not face down would be,
Be very painful
but
too.
still, you know, you've got your organs protected.
Protected, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But that they literally, when they conquered you, would walk. And I guess that maybe that's where we get the term getting walked all over.
Probably.
Probably so, yeah. But now God is going to give this humiliation to those who humiliated his people. Have you ever heard someone say to you, because obviously Isaiah is saying, this is what God is saying to you. Have you ever heard people say, well, God spoke to me and I know this? Have you ever met anybody? What do you think that means? Has God ever spoken to you? Is it an audible voice that you hear? Is it?
No, it's, when I feel that way, it's more like a small, quiet voice going.
Yeah. Right.
He guided
And if I try to ignore it, it gets pushier. Hey,
It sounds like our cats.
Jeff says he doesn't
Yeah.
want to wake up and see a bush burning and not being consumed, so he tries to listen.
yeah, but
Don't want a
it's
talking azalea on fire,
yeah.
going nowhere.
Just a sideline, there used to be a woman in the church that developed a Christian drama group. And we did a skit. And when Moses saw the burning bush, he called 911. And I was the 911 operator in this skit.
Uh-huh.
And I did a real hokey southern drawl, and I had on way too much jewelry and bright red lipstick and
Uh-huh.
a headset. I mean, it was funny. It's a miracle I could get through it, but it was funny.
Oh, my gosh.
Her husband got transferred to Florida. And so she's doing her theater thing down there, but yeah.
Uh-huh.
So every time I hear the burning bush, I think, and so I answer the phone, 911, how can I help you?
Yeah.
But yeah, don't want a burning bush.
That's right. What do you think is the clearest way we get direction from God? today? Or that you get direction from God today? Sarah says she gets like a little push, like she starts to get, is it like a feeling you
Yeah,
get? A
it's just-
thought?
I just have a thought and where'd that come from? And I'll dismiss it, it pops back up again, and
Mhm.
the third time I'm going, okay. Especially if it's not something I want to do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, especially if it's out of my comfort zone too. Like
Yes.
if it's like, I don't know, Lord, I'm kind of busy right now.
Yeah,
But you
But
come
I-
back next week, I think I can schedule you in.
I look back on my life now and and one day I'll tell you all the story because it takes too long. But there were times when God was guiding me through other people, saying, hey, do you want to do this? And me having the sensors to go, yeah, okay, whatever.
Mhm. One of my favorite authors is a 19th century author, Henry David Thoreau, and he talks about a thing called impassioned recollection, which is when we go through our lives and we don't always realize how significant an event is going to be until we look back.
Mhm.
And then because of our impassioned recollection, we realize that that decision, that moment, that event became a significant point, a turning point, a milestone in our lives. And I think about that when I think about, things that have happened to me, that there are different moments I can look back on. And it seems not so important when I made the decision.
Yeah.
But later I realized that was a very significant moment when I made that decision.
Well, for me, it was my advisor saying, you interested in tutoring? I said, I didn't know anything. What's involved? He opened his introduction to accounting book, wrote down my name. He said, give me your phone number. He wrote down my phone number. He said, every time somebody comes and asks for help, I give them your name and your phone number. When they call you, you say $5 an hour. And that's what started my teaching career. Because if you had told me I was going to end up teaching my whole life, I would have told you you were absolutely nuts, certifiably insane. No way on God's green earth was I going to teach.
Mhm.
And God said,
Don't you often find that, what is it that say, man makes plans and God laughs? Yeah.
yeah.
So, what do you think, what's going on presently? That, and I think that this is interesting, that we're genuinely fearful about. What makes us feel that perhaps right now we are drinking the cup of God's wrath, God's fury, as a nation?
The news every evening.
Yeah.
Well, the news isn't making that happen.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's reminding
It's
us.
what
Yeah.
it's what
Yeah.
the news is telling us.
Right, yeah.
Well, I don't know,
Right.
sometimes I think the news is creating it.
Well,
So,
that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, particularly some of these 24-hour cycle,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
they have to
sometimes they're
create-
trying to create fear and anxiety to get you to come back
Some are.
in.
I've heard
Yeah.
that create fear and anxiety. Right.
I thought it was interesting because her sermon this morning was about fear.
And exactly.
And it says, why is fear? One of the questions I was thinking about, why is fear a paralyzing force against us? What is it about fear?
Well, is it part of the fight or flight? And I saw something today, not today, but within the last couple of weeks. Fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah, the
Oh,
And it's the,
freeze.
yeah, it's like, do I fight? Do I?
Yeah,
run?
the fight
I
or
don't know.
flight has been adjusted to include freeze. now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
Which makes sense.
it makes a whole lot of sense because
Right.
you're trying to decide whether to fight or flight.
mhm.
Should I do this? Should I do that?
And you're trapped by your own sense of indecision.
Richard Adams in the book Watership Down had one of the rabbits in the middle of the road, and here was this vehicle, he called it an hoodoo, coming down on the rabbit, and the rabbit went tharn. So that was his freeze.
Uh-huh.
He couldn't do anything.
Mhm.
No rabbit.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting. I see a trend in prepper YouTube YouTubes now, and many of the people I follow, one of the first things they'll tell you to do is to pray. You know, right with God. And then they go on to, you know, get out of debt, save food, save water, you know, make a plan, blah, blah, blah. But one of the first things they will tell you is to get right with God, to pray, to strengthen your faith for whatever may be coming.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because my son, as some of you know, works for the government. And what little he can tell me, that word pray never shows up in any of the meetings and so forth. And I always think that should be one of the leading things to open these intel meetings.
That doesn't mean that there aren't people praying.
Yeah.
I hope they are.
True, you know, and I
Right.
think there's small pockets in government. For example, you know, y'all know I work for state police, but any number of work groups that I'm familiar with will start meetings or with prayers. You know, they'll pray before meals, and I think the public would probably be shocked to think that police officers are doing that, but it happens all the time.
That's wonderful.
And prayer doesn't have to be out loud,
Right.
you know. I worked in the public sector all of my career, and that doesn't mean I wasn't praying.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
Well, you know, the old joke, as long as there are tests in school, there will be prayer.
exactly, exactly. And I used to pray for my kids,
Oh,
you know, and someone told me that they were going through a hard time with me, one of my students. I would often say, is it all right if I pray with you? Or I pray for you? And they would go, yes, like, and be very relieved that,
Yeah.
you know, so, okay,
Mhm.
it's somebody else is gonna be praying about this. It was, and the older I got, and I kind of was more forceful about my belief than when I was younger. You know, I was more open about what I believed in. I would say, you know, that, well, all of you know I'm a Christian and I go to church on Sundays, and they would go, because of the way, the slant off I had on things and stuff. So, and I think that gave them an opportunity to be, you know, I always felt like as long as you believe in something bigger than yourself, God's going to take that to his own glory.
I'm a disciple because one of my teachers shared his faith in classroom, and one night said he was going to be preaching the next Sunday, and it was at Hanover Avenue Christian Church before it folded, and I lived 2 whole blocks from there, and I was curious about a statistics professor preaching, so I went to hear him and stayed. And he left, became an Episcopal, and then left that, and now he's a Presbyterian, but I've been a disciple ever since.
Good for you.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you look back on your faith story, what
Yeah.
led you to where we are today.
Mhm.
I would say probably that my grandmother was, and then my mother, of course, were the 2 greatest forces in my life. I'd go and stay with my grandmother every summer. She would pick me up the day school got out and bring me back the day before school started to get me away from my father. And one of the things we'd always do is after dinner, she'd play the piano and we'd sing hymns, all the old hymns, you know, when the roll is called up yonder, and the old rugged cross. And it was such a part of her life. And her 2 sisters would come over and we'd all harmonize, and it was just fun. You know, it was a fun thing for us to do. She found joy in her faith. It brought her joy and peace, and to see that Christ brought joy to our lives. To me, that was an important aspect.
hopefully we convey that ourselves now too.
Yeah,
I had a faculty member in one of my workshops I was conducting, a week-long workshop, and she was Muslim. And I didn't know particularly the demands of their faith and the praying schedule and so forth. And so I pulled her aside and asked her, about that, and should I work some sort of a break into the class kind of time thing so that she could do her prayer. And she said that she thanked me and said that her imam had given her a pass to not have to do that during this period. But she also told me that in her life, I'm the first person who ever asked her anything like that.
Wow.
I had a special place in my library where my Muslim students could come in my office, where they could shut the door so they weren't out in public, like the Pharisees, and that they could come and pray whenever they wanted. And I can't tell you how many times I'd open the door to go in and back out, because one of them was in there doing her prayers with their little rug and stuff.
Right.
Well, Sarah, can you read chapter 52, 1-3? Then I'll make you read 4-6 in a minute.
Okay. Wake up, put on your strength, Zion, put on your majestic clothes, Jerusalem, holy city, because the uncircumcised or taboo person will never again come into you. Shake yourself from the dirt, get up, sit down, Jerusalem. They are loosening the bonds from on your neck, captive Miss Zion. Because Yahweh has said this, for nothing you were sold, without silver you will be restored.
Okay. Okay. The first awake in Isaiah 51:9, which y'all did last week, asked the Lord to put on strength. The second awake, 51:17, asked Jerusalem to awake. And now the third awake tells Zion to put on strength in light of the two awakenings. So we got 3 calls to wake up. Like, wake up from your spiritual lethargy, your spiritual sleepiness, whatever. Wake up, wake up. The Lord is at hand. The Lord is coming. Drinking the cup of wrath is over. Okay, and it says, put on your beautiful garments, for the uncircumcised and the unclean shall no longer come to you. You have sold yourselves for nothing, and you will be redeemed without money. Okay, you sold yourselves to these idols and other gods, but now you'll be redeemed without money. I'm not going to pay a financial ransom. There's going to be a different ransom being paid for you. So again, this a little bit, as I said before, this prophecy of Christ to come. You shall be redeemed without money. In fact, at the end of Isaiah 52, we're going to see how much it costs to be redeemed and who's going to redeem us. Okay, Sarah, could you do 4-6?
Because my Lord Yahweh has said this, my people went down to Egypt at the beginning to sojourn there, but Assyria oppressed them to no purpose. Now what was there for me here? Yahweh's declaration, that my people were taken for nothing. Its rulers boast, Yahweh's declaration, and constantly all day my name stands reviled. Therefore my people will acknowledge my name. Therefore on that day they will acknowledge that I'm the one who speaks. Here I am.
Okay. Okay, those who rule over them will make them wail, and my name is blasphemed continually every day. Okay, God looks down and sees Egypt held them in captivity. The Assyrians oppressed them, walked over them, literally, and the Babylonians took them away for nothing and ruled them cruelly. And worse than that, they treated God's people disrespectfully and the Lord himself disrespectfully, blaspheming his name. every day. But then God says, but my people will know my name. Yet God can glorify himself. He will do it with his own people. It is almost as if God said, I can abide with my name being blasphemed constantly every day among the nations. Just let it be known and praised among my people. Just let my people. And therefore, they shall know in the day that I am he who speaks. Okay, God promises there will come a day when they will know in that day it is him who speaks. All right, Jeff, can you read 7 through 10?
How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, who brings good news, who announces salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Listen, your sentinels lift up their voices. Together they sing for joy. For in plain sight they see the return of the Lord to Zion. Break forth together into singing, you ruins of Jerusalem. For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord has bared his holy arm before the eyes of all nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God.
I love the first part. How beautiful are the feet on the mountains of those who bring good news. I love that. The feet speak of they're out actively bringing good news, motion, progress. And then we look, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. The good news of peace, glad tidings, salvation, all that is summed up in 3 words. Your God reigns. Because when God reigns, that's what we're going to have. Good news, good tidings, salvation. And he says, go out there and spread the good news. Get active. Tell people, wake up, wake up, wake up. And then it says, the watchmen who see this happy return are probably those in Jerusalem who had long awaited the messengers. According to Ezekiel, the prophets were the watchmen of the nation. They're the ones prophesying and saying, he's coming. The Lord may bear his holy arm. Okay. The expression made bare his holy arm is a Hebrew idiom, kind of like we say, things. It literally means to roll up your sleeves and get to work, just like it does today. So he laid bare his holy arm. I'm rolling up my sleeves and getting to work on you people. I'm here. I'm bringing the good news. In the eyes of all the nations and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God. He does not make his saving strength known just for his people, but the entire earth shall see the salvation of our God. So again, the idea that Jesus's sacrifice will be for all. Salvation will be for all. Okay, Catherine, can you do 11 and 12?
Go away, leave that place. Do not touch anything unclean. Get out of her, purify yourselves, you who carry Yahweh's vessels. For you are not to hurry away, you are not to leave like fugitives. No, Yahweh marches at your head, and the God of Israel is your rear guard. The new Exodus.
Okay, it was intended to the Babylonian captives Isaiah had prophesied to, but it can also be extended to all, to separate ourselves from Babylon, both literally and spiritually. Separate ourselves from false gods, separate ourselves from this world, a time to purify, for we are the vessels of the Lord. 2 Timothy 2:21 says, therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from the latter, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified and useful for the master, prepared for every good work. And he says, don't go in haste, for I will go before you, and I will lead the way.
It's gonna come up from the backside too. from
Yes.
your guard. Yeah.
Will you read 13 through 15 also, Catherine?
Look, my servant will prosper, will grow great, will rise to great heights. As many people were aghast at him, he was so inhumanly disfigured that he no longer looked like a man. So many nations will be astonished, and kings will stay tight-lipped before him, seeing what had never been told them, learning what they had never heard before.
Behold my servant. This passage here through the end of Isaiah 53 has as its focus the servant of the Lord, which is Jesus. This is the servant previously spoken of in Isaiah 42:1, Isaiah 49:3, and Isaiah 49:6. Though through the book of Isaiah, many have been called servants of the Lord in one way or another. Isaiah was called a servant, Eliakim, Eliakim. That's in Isaiah 22, Isaiah 20, David, Isaiah 37, and Israel, Isaiah 41. But there is no doubt to biblical scholars that the phrase is also used as a specific title for the Messiah. And this is what is in view here. The New King James Version rightly capitalizes servant. Behold my capital letter servant. Because the context demonstrates this is a clear reference to Jesus. Additionally, Matthew quotes Isaiah plainly and says it's a prophecy fulfilled in Jesus. That's in Matthew 12. Additionally, in Matthew 8, the Bible takes this passage of Matthew 52:13 through 53:12 and says it specifically applies to Jesus. A lot of people are amazed that people can't read this chapter like this and miss Jesus. And a lot, like, why do you think that is? Why do you think that people can read this chapter that Jesus is coming and they're prophesying the Messiah, the servant of the Lord. He's going to bring salvation to all the world. Why do you think that people hear about Jesus but don't hear it? Or,
Sometimes things have to be said pretty explicitly for some folks.
for some folks.
Yeah, and so
I think it can be confusing. I know that I was reading it to be Christ, but then they mention Cyrus. They mention Babylon being a servant. They mention Assyria being a servant. And then they mention Cyrus, who helped God free his people. You know, it was really a servant to free the people so they could return to Jerusalem. So I think that it can be confusing.
Okay. He says he shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. These are the first words of the Lord in his mouth concerning his servant. He will be exalted and will be very high. It goes on to say, and so shall he sprinkle many nations. And in the Old Testament, sprinkling has to do with cleansing you of your sin. And that's where we get the idea of some people do a christening, and some people do baptism, and some people will do both. The sprinkling is the beginning of the redemption of your sins. And it says that the Messiah will bring cleansing to many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths at him. Okay, 53. Tom, could you read
Yes.
53, 1 through 3?
Okay. Who has believed what we have heard? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity, and as one from whom others hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him of no account.
Okay. Isaiah anticipates at least two things here. At first, how strange and contradictory it seems that this suffering Messiah is at the same time salvation and cleansing. And secondly, that he anticipates the rejection of the Messiah, that many will not believe our report of him. And I think it's interesting how they describe him. He obviously is not going to get by on his good looks. It isn't something where, you know, people are going to feel attracted to him because he is so handsome. He doesn't have anything that would necessarily attract you to him. He's kind of plain. And it says that he shall grow up before him as a tender plant. He increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men, Luke 2:52. And it says that he is a root out of dry ground. And one of the Spurgeon says, do not say it's useless to preach down there or to send missionaries to that uncivilized country. How do you know? Is it very dry ground? Ah, well, that's hopeful soil. Christ himself is a root out of a dry ground. And the more there is to discourage, the more you should be encouraged. Read it the other way. Is it dark? Then all is fair for a grand show of light. The light will never seem so bright as when the night is very, very dark. And then it says that he is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Most of our sorrow is really just self-pity. It's feeling sorry for ourselves. And it doesn't say that he was a man of sorrow. He was a man of sorrows. He's not feeling sorry for himself. He's feeling sorry for all that he saw, for the sin, for what had happened to his father's creation, to creation itself, and that this sacrifice was going to be necessary. Really have kind of screwed it up by now. Okay, in 1 Timothy 3, one of the requirements for leaders of the church is that they be sober-minded. The word describes the person who is able to think clearly and with clarity. And it says that it doesn't mean to be solemn and sober, but it does mean to keep an appropriate seriousness about the idea that Christ is coming. Okay, 4 through 6. Tom, can you keep going?
Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases, yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God, and afflicted. But He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have all turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth.
Keep going through
Okay,
9, please.
Okay. By a perversion of justice, he was taken away. Who could have imagined his future? For he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. They made his grave with the wicked and his tomb with the rich, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth.
Okay. The fact that they used that he was cut off from the land of the living, kind of suggests that it was going to be a violent death. It was not going to be a natural death. And they made his grave with the wicked. Jesus died in the company of the wicked. And it was the intention of those supervising his execution to cast him in a common grave. But it says that but with the rich in his death, Joseph of Arimathea gave him a tomb. And again, the idea that the prophecy was being fulfilled. The line, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth, is important. It shows that even in his death, even in his taking the transgressions of God's people, the Messiah never sinned. He remained the Holy One. 10 through 11, can you keep going, Tom? You did
Yes.
a great job.
Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him with affliction. When you make his life an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring and shall prolong his days. Through him, the will of the Lord shall prosper. Out of his anguish, he shall see. He shall find satisfaction through his knowledge. The righteous one, my servant, shall make many righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. And all the way through 12?
Yes, please.
Good. Bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will allot him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out himself to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors.
Okay, yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. Biblical scholars make a point of saying this was not man's victory. This was not Satan's victory. God chose this path. This was God's will to cause him. And so therefore it was God's victory. God was in Christ recognizing the world, reconciling the world to himself. 2 Corinthians 5:19. The Father and the Son worked together at the cross. Though Jesus was treated as if he were an enemy of God, he was not. Even as Jesus was punished as if he were a sinner, he was performing the most holy service to God the Father ever offered. This is why Isaiah can say, it pleased the Lord to bruise him. It accomplished the work of reconciling the world to himself. And he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. The death, the burial, and the offering of the Messiah is not the end of the story. He lives on, he lives to see his seed, his spiritual descendants. He shall prolong his days and not be under the curse of death. And the life he lives after his death and burial is glorious, because he will live in the pleasure of the Lord. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. Therefore, God will give him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoils with the strong. Philippians 2:10-11. So that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of those in heaven and of those on earth and those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. The extraordinary glories of Christ as Savior will be seen. Okay, the one thing that I thought was interesting, I went back and looked at the Messiah lyrics. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Isaiah 53:3 is one of the arias. The chorus, surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. Isaiah 53:4-5. Isaiah 53:5, and with the stripes we are healed. Isaiah 53:6, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. And Isaiah 53:8, he was cut off from the land of the living, for the transgression of thy people was he stricken. Directly from Isaiah comes several verses from Messiah, which I thought was interesting.
In verse 12, there's, Mark quotes part of 12, so does Luke. So,
So this is the big prophecy of the servant to come and the salvation to come. Not just the salvation from the Babylonians, the Assyrians, salvation for all, forever.
so multiple layers of meaning.
Yes. Yes.
In my version, it used in verse 11, after he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied by his knowledge. My righteous servant will justify many. And I was wondering if I didn't hear light of life in others in the readings that we did today, but it's just sometimes that they don't use that particular statement.
I like that.
Yeah, mine just says he will see the light and be content.
Which verse?
11.
11.
Kind of holding it, out of his personal trouble.
When he sees, he will be sated by his acknowledgement. My servant will show many that he is indeed faithful when he bears their wayward act.
No light.
So a whole different way.
Yeah.
Out of his anguish, he shall see light.
Maybe it can be interpreted to be out of death shall come life. Interesting, Susan.
All right, so my Bible has this footnote that the light is Greek. The Hebrew omits that.
Oh, okay.
Here Yahweh speaks to explain the mystery of the sufferings of the upright servant. He is not suffering for any guilt of his own, but takes the rebellious acts of the many on himself and intercedes for them. So that's maybe the difference.
Okay.
So,
Well, we will start with chapter 54.
Yeah, it's me next week. So
Okay.
all right.